At some point in modern life, it became normal to live entirely inside one's own head. An entire generation spends its days ruminating thoughts, reliving past mistakes, anticipating future catastrophes, analyzing social interactions to exhaustion. All of this happens while the body remains still, numb, as if it were merely a physical support for the brain to function. People walk the streets, work, interact, but often with the feeling that they are watching their own life from a distance, as if they were mere observers of a movie in which they cannot act. And yet, they call this life. Psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk, one of the leading experts on psychological trauma today, proposed a radically different view of this phenomenon. According to him, this constant mental hyperactivity, often labeled as overthinking or generalized anxiety, may actually be a symptom of dissociation. It is not a personality defect or a conscious choice, but an adaptive response of the brain to experiences that, at some point, made the body a dangerous place to inhabit. What many call introspection or extreme rationality may just be the visible surface of a much deeper and painful mechanism: the disconnection from one's own corporeality as a means of survival. This thesis raises a troubling question. What if the mind that never stops thinking is, in fact, a mind in flight? Escaping the body, escaping feeling, escaping the present. Van der Kolk observed over decades of work with traumatized patients that trauma, whether explicit, like abuse or violence, or subtle, like emotional neglect or chronic stress, often pushes the individual out of the body. The mind dissociates from sensory experience as a last resort to maintain sanity amid pain. And this dissociation, which at some point protected, later transforms into a prison. In today's world, this phenomenon has become almost epidemic. The culture of performance, the extreme valorization of intellect, the disdain for emotions, and the compulsive use of technology have created the perfect conditions for mass dissociation. The body, with its pains, needs, and limitations, is seen as an obstacle to success. Feeling is treated as weakness. Pausing is synonymous with failure. And so, millions of people live entirely in the mind, hyper-rational, analytical, hyperstimulated, but disconnected from the very living experience of existing. This video is not just a psychological analysis. It is a call, a warning, an attempt to return to the collective consciousness of forgotten truth. Living in the mind is surviving. Living in the body is existing. Real life, the one that pulses with presence, connection, pleasure, intuition, and emotion, does not happen in thoughts, plans, or analyses. It happens in the now, in the body, in the senses. And as long as you remain locked inside your head, this life will continue to pass you by without being truly lived. In the next few minutes, we will explore why so many are trapped in this invisible prison, how this dissociation forms, and, more importantly, how it is possible to escape it, not with empty theories or magic formulas, but with a deep dive into the work of Bessel van der Kolk and the somatic practices that have been transforming the way we understand psychological healing. Because when you finally descend from the mind and return to the body, everything changes. To understand why so many people are trapped in their own heads, it is necessary to abandon the superficial explanation that they think too much out of habit or choice. Bessel van der Kolk has shown that, in most cases, this disconnection from the body does not arise from rationality, but from fear. Dissociation occurs when the body ceases to be a safe place to inhabit. When feeling hurts too much, the mind learns to escape. In situations of trauma, physical abuse, emotional neglect, violence, constant humiliation, or even prolonged stress without the possibility of relief, the organism enters survival mode. The nervous system understands that being fully present in the body is dangerous. Physical sensations begin to carry pain, terror, helplessness, or shame. And when the body becomes a field of threat, the only possible way out is to disconnect from it. The mind takes absolute control because thinking seems safer than feeling. Van der Kolk repeatedly observed that traumatized patients reported a strange and persistent feeling. They knew what was happening around them, but they did not feel that they were really there. Emotions felt distant. The body seemed anesthetized, and life was lived as if it were being observed from the outside. This is not a psychological failure. It is an intelligent adaptation. The brain does exactly what it was designed to do: protect the individual from what threatens their integrity. The problem is that the nervous system does not understand time in the same way that the rational mind does. What was learned in a moment of danger continues to operate even when the threat no longer exists. The body remains in a state of alert or shutdown, and the mind remains hyperactive, trying to control everything to prevent the individual from feeling something that, in the past, was unbearable. The dissociation that once saved now becomes limiting. This is the crucial point of Van der Kolk's thesis. Many people do not live in their heads because they enjoy thinking, but because they have learned that feeling was dangerous. Unprocessed emotions are stored in the body, in the muscles, in breathing, in heart rate, in the digestive system. Coming down from the head would mean coming into contact with this raw material, and the organism, remembering what it has lived through, resists. It prefers mental imprisonment to emotional threat. Over time, this disconnection becomes normalized. The person begins to believe that this state is their personality. They define themselves as rational, cold, controlled, when in fact they are dissociated. They live in constant thoughts because thoughts act as a buffer against feeling. The body falls silent but demands its price. Diffuse anxiety, a sense of emptiness, difficulty in experiencing pleasure, lack of vitality, panic attacks without apparent cause, or the persistent feeling of not being truly alive. Van der Kolk was emphatic in stating that trauma does not live in the story we tell, but in the sensations we avoid. As long as the body is not recognized again as a safe place, the mind will continue to dominate the experience. And this explains why merely talking about or rationally understanding the problem is often not enough. Dissociation is not resolved with intellectual insight. It is resolved with bodily reconnection. This understanding completely changes the way we perceive modern suffering. Overthinking ceases to be a cognitive defect and becomes a sign that something deeper is being avoided. The question shifts from, "How do I think less?" to, "What has my body learned was dangerous to feel?" But individual dissociation does not happen in a vacuum. It is amplified, reinforced, and even encouraged by the world we live in. To understand why leaving the body has become almost a collective standard, one must look beyond personal trauma and analyze the cultural environment that teaches daily that thinking is worth more than feeling. This is exactly what will be explored in the next part. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. If dissociation begins as a response to trauma, it is perpetuated and normalized by a social environment that glorifies thinking and marginalizes feeling. We live in a culture that values productivity, logic, control, and efficiency, all functions associated with the rational mind, while despising vulnerability, emotion, intuition, and bodily pleasure. The disconnection between body and mind is not just individual, it is systematically cultivated. From an early age, we are taught to control our emotions, to not make a drama, to think with the head and not with the heart. The body is seen as something to be dominated, shaped, disciplined, a tool for performance, not for wisdom. Children are punished for crying, teenagers are shamed for expressing desire, and adults are rewarded for ignoring their physical limits in the name of professional success. The result is an entire society that lives from the neck up. This rationalist mentality has deep roots. The legacy of Cartesian thought, which separates mind and body, still guides our educational, medical, and even spiritual models. We are trained to believe that the mind is the center of identity, the place of consciousness and morality, while the body is instinct, chaos, weakness. Traditional medicine treats the body as a machine, and psychology often treats the mind as isolated software. And when someone suffers, the first question is almost always, what are you thinking? Rarely, what are you feeling in your body right now? But the body is where life really happens. As Bessel van der Kolk said, the body keeps the score. Emotions are, by definition, bodily experiences. Sadness tightens the chest, anger warms the skin, fear closes the throat. Intuition is not an idea. It is a sensation in the stomach. Pleasure is not a concept. It is a muscular vibration, an electric current in the nerves. And yet, we live as if it were possible to feel pleasure, connection, presence, or peace just by thinking about it. Technology further intensifies this split. We spend hours in front of screens that demand cognitive attention, but no physical engagement. Social media offers us relationships without touch, communication without voice, validation without presence. The body remains still while the mind spins at high speed. And the most perverse part, we are praised for it. Productivity is rewarded, performance is monetized, and being busy has become a status symbol. At the same time, we are bombarded with superficial discourses about self-care and well-being, which often ignore the somatic dimension of existence. Taking a hot bath, doing skincare, or binge-watching series are sold as forms of relaxation. But none of them require presence in the body. They anesthetize, not connect. And so, we increasingly lose the ability to inhabit our own being. When the entire society is dissociated, the individual trying to reconnect with the body feels strange, out of place, even weak. Feeling deeply, pausing, resting, touching, breathing with awareness, all of this is seen as a waste of time in a world that rewards speed and rationality. But this same world is becoming ill. The alarming levels of depression, anxiety, burnout, insomnia, and existential emptiness are the price of a life without embodied presence. Van der Kolk reminds us that living exclusively in the head means living in simulation. Thinking about life is not the same as living it, and as long as the body is ignored, the human experience will remain incomplete, superficial, dysfunctional. Modern culture reinforces dissociation to the point of making it imperceptible. You can spend your entire life believing you are functioning normally, when in fact, you are merely performing an existence without ever being truly present. But this disconnection does not occur solely due to cultural influence. There is a silent, almost omnipresent agent that accelerates the process of dissociation, continuous digital stimulation. In the next part, we will explore how the constant bombardment of screens and information hyperactivates the mind, paralyzes the body, and further distances us from the somatic experience. Because while the mind navigates the chaos of the virtual world, the body continues to wait to be inhabited. We live in the era of mental hyperstimulation. It has never been easier to keep the mind occupied, distracted, and overloaded. From morning until dawn, we jump from screen to screen. Notifications, messages, videos, endless feeds, online meetings, ads, alerts, graphs, maps, incessant visual and auditory stimuli. All of this seems normal, even inevitable. But the truth is brutal. This avalanche of information not only excites the mind, it paralyzes the body, disconnects the senses, and reinforces the dissociative state that keeps us trapped inside our heads. What people call digital life is, in practice, a chronic state of somatic disconnection. While the eyes absorb data, the body remains static, ignored, anesthetized. You might be consuming 5 hours of content about health, spirituality, and well-being, and still not have felt your own body even once during the day. The mind flies, but the feet do not touch the ground. This is the new dissociation, a body physically present but existentially absent. Bessel van der Kolk notes that trauma does not need to be a dramatic event. Continuous exposure to stress, sensory overload, and the absence of pause also has the power to fragment the human experience. When the mind is constantly in a state of alertness, responding to stimuli, comparing itself, anticipating, producing, the nervous system remains activated with no space to restore, and the body, prevented from completing its natural cycles of emotion and presence, gradually becomes uninhabited. Modern technology is not just a distraction. It shapes the way we perceive reality, and more importantly, how we feel about ourselves. Infinite scrolling creates microdoses of dopamine that addict the brain to quick and superficial stimulation. The absence of silence and boredom prevents internal diving. And constant comparison with edited lives promotes not only insecurity, but a rupture with one's own bodily authenticity. The image overrides the sensation. Moreover, the relationship between screen and body is always unequal. Every digital activity demands a fixed posture, shallow breathing, and a lack of spontaneous movement. The screen demands focus, but inhibits action. And this paradox is fatal. The brain processes tons of information, while the body remains inert. It's like revving an engine to the max with the handbrake pulled. Over time, this state creates mental fatigue, emotional exhaustion, and an almost irreversible physical disconnection. Van der Kolk emphasizes that healing from trauma, and by extension from dissociation, cannot be purely cognitive. It requires bodily experiences that restore trust in the body as a place of safety, pleasure, and guidance. But as long as life is mediated by screens, algorithms, and incessant external stimuli, this reconnection becomes nearly impossible. The digital world offers us a simulation of presence, but without the body, there is no real life, only consumption. The most alarming thing is that this pattern affects everyone, not just those already traumatized. Children grow up without contact with their bodies. Teenagers live entire lives online before even understanding their basic emotions. Adults are so identified with their profiles, schedules, and tasks that they do not realize how absent they are from themselves. Dissociation, in this scenario, is not an exception, it is the norm. And here arises a dilemma. If the mind is hyper-attentive and the body forgotten, how do we reverse this cycle? How do we regain embodied presence in a world that rewards distraction? The answer begins with something simple, yet revolutionary. Feeling, observing the body, noticing sensations, recognizing that each emotion has a physical expression. In the next part, we will explore exactly this, how the simple practice of naming bodily sensations can be the first step to breaking the mental prison and restoring the lost connection between mind and body. Because before living fully, one must return to feeling. There is a simple yet extremely powerful question that is rarely asked in the daily lives of those who suffer from anxiety, rumination, or emotional disconnection. Where exactly do you feel this in your body? According to Bessel van der Kolk, this question is one of the most important starting points for interrupting the cycle of dissociation and restoring the integration between mind and body. Because the truth that almost no one says is that emotions are not thoughts. They are physical sensations. Fear is not just an idea. It is a tightness in the chest, a tingling in the hands, a shiver down the spine. Sadness is not just a mood. It is a lump in the throat, a weight on the shoulders, a feeling of emptiness in the stomach. Anger is not just an impulse. It is heat rising in the face, tense muscles, rapid breathing. But in a culture that idolizes rationality and silences the body, these sensations are ignored, anesthetized, or interpreted only through logic. The consequence of this is devastating. We lose direct access to our own emotional compass. When you name a physical sensation associated with an emotion, something happens neurologically. Areas of the brain linked to language and self-regulation are activated, and the nervous system begins to move out of a reactive state and into a state of integration. This is the foundation of many modern therapeutic approaches, such as somatic psychotherapy, somatic experiencing, and even Eastern contemplative practices, bringing awareness to the body not as a metaphor, but as a literal truth. To feel is to know. This reconnection requires practice. Most people are so used to living in their heads that they don't even realize they are dissociated. Ask someone, "What are you feeling right now?" And they are likely to respond with a thought, "I think I'm stressed because there's a meeting tomorrow." That is not an emotion, it is an analysis. The real challenge is to descend from the mind to the body and ask, how is stress manifesting in me right now? Where does it reside at this moment? This shift in focus transforms the subjective experience from something vague and diffuse to something concrete, tangible, and processable. Bessel van der Kolk states that the body does not forget. If trauma or suffering is frozen in the nervous system, it will not be dissolved with intellectual explanations. It needs to be recognized and metabolized at the physical level. And this begins with something incredibly simple, yet deeply neglected: feeling and naming. Saying, "I feel a tightness in my throat, my chest feels heavy, I feel warmth in my face," is more transformative than hours of purely mental analysis. Because it is at this moment that the mind stops fleeing and the body begins to speak. This practice also breaks emotional automatism. When you name a sensation, you create a space between the stimulus and the reaction. Anger ceases to be a blind impulse and becomes a perceived energy. Anxiety stops being an internal confusion and transforms into specific sensations that can be welcomed. This returns power to the individual. You cease to be a hostage to the emotion and become a witness to it. And this presence changes everything. But this process requires more than language. It demands physical presence. Being in the body is not a concept. It is a daily practice. And for many, especially those who are deeply dissociated, the simple act of feeling is terrifying. Therefore, before diving into repressed emotions, one must relearn how to be safely in the body. The next part is dedicated precisely to this: how grounding, rooting in the here and now through physical stimuli, becomes a vital anchor for those beginning to emerge from the mind and return to life. Because before facing deeper emotions, one must have solid ground beneath their feet. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. For those who live trapped inside their own heads, getting out of the mind and back into the body is not a natural movement. It is a leap into the unknown. And like any leap, it requires safety. It is pointless to ask someone who is deeply dissociated to feel their body, if that body has, for years, been a territory of pain, shame, or confusion. For many, being present in themselves is the greatest challenge there is. Therefore, before exploring deep emotions or advanced somatic practices, it is necessary to establish a basic starting point: grounding. A return to the here and now through direct physical perception. Grounding is not an esoteric concept. It is a neurobiological process. When you are dissociated, your nervous system is operating in extreme states, either hyperactivated, anxiety, agitation, mental acceleration, or hypoactivated, numbness, apathy, feeling disconnected. In both cases, the body is ignored, either because it is in panic or because it is anesthetized. Grounding reverses this state by bringing attention back to the most primary senses: touch, temperature, pressure, texture, ambient sound, weight of the body on the ground. Bessel van der Kolk emphasizes that the first step to healing trauma is not to understand what happened, but to perceive what is happening now, in the body. Simple practices like touching a cold surface, pressing your feet against the ground, holding an object firmly, breathing while feeling the air entering and leaving through the nostrils. All of this communicates to the brain that we are safe, present, and alive. These sensory stimuli activate the parasympathetic nervous system, responsible for regulating and calming the body. It is like building an internal ground. In moments of acute dissociation, when you feel floating, disconnected, out of yourself, grounding is literally a rescue. It interrupts the spiral of intrusive thoughts and brings awareness back to the body. Techniques like holding ice in your hands, walking barefoot on the ground, dipping your hands in cold water, or even smelling something with a strong scent, like peppermint essential oil, may seem trivial, but they are profoundly effective. They not only bring you back, but help the nervous system relearn that the present is bearable, and that being in the body is not a sentence, but a possibility. This process is especially important for those beginning to face traumatic memories or repressed emotions. Without grounding, somatic practice can become overwhelming, leading to re-traumatization. But with grounding, the body gradually learns to sustain intense sensations without collapsing. As van der Kolk states, healing begins when the body discovers it can survive emotions without being destroyed by them. And this discovery is only possible if there is a physical and concrete support point. But grounding also has a symbolic power. In a digitized, accelerated, and hypermentalized world, stopping to feel the ground beneath your feet is an act of silent rebellion. It is saying, "I am here," when everything pushes you towards the automatic, the virtual, the compulsive thinking. It is a choice for presence, for embodiment, for full existence. A small but revolutionary step. And when this ground begins to feel familiar, the body demands more. It starts to require movement, expression, release. The vitality that was frozen by dissociation begins to want to flow. And that is where the next step in the reconnection journey emerges: conscious movement. The next part will explore how body practices that require presence, such as yoga, dance, martial arts, and intuitive movement, not only strengthen the bond with the body, but also restructure the mind, reorganize emotion, and open space for a new way of being in the world. Because once the body becomes safe again, it can also become alive again. When the body ceases to be a battleground and becomes a habitable place, something extraordinary begins to happen. You return to life. Not the mental life, fragmented, anxious, and incessantly analyzed, but the embodied life, felt, present. With each conscious breath, each step taken with intention, each sensation allowed without judgment, you begin to rebuild the bridge between what you think and what you are. And in this integration, everything changes. Bessel van der Kolk wrote that the body is the stage where emotional life unfolds, and that emotions are not abstractions. They are physical experiences that need to be lived, metabolized, and released. When the mind is alone, it goes in circles. But when the body enters the equation, reality becomes tangible. Anxiety decreases because there is a safe place to anchor. Decisions become clearer because intuition, which has always been bodily, is heard again. Human relationships change because now you are truly present. You are no longer performing, pleasing, or trying to control everything. You are here, alive. Over time, simple things gain an intensity that once seemed impossible. A hug is no longer just a social gesture. It is a living exchange of energy and presence. Eating something delicious is not just satisfying a need. It is a dive into the senses. Nature ceases to be a backdrop and becomes a mirror of your own internal rhythm. Life becomes more colorful, deeper, more unpredictable, but also more bearable. Because now you have an anchor within yourself. And it's not about healing the trauma as if it were about eliminating something. It's about learning to live with it, integrating it, allowing it to tell its story without taking control of the narrative. As van der Kolk said, healing is not forgetting the past, but living in the present without being dominated by it. And this is only possible when you descend from the mind and return to the body. The mind is an excellent tool, but a terrible home. The body, on the other hand, is where life truly happens. The problem is that many people only realize this when they are already on the brink of collapse. When overthinking has turned into chronic exhaustion, when disconnection has turned into isolation, when the absence of pleasure has turned into apathy. But you don't have to wait until that point. You can start now. You can begin with a sigh, with a pause, with a conscious touch. You can start simply by feeling your feet on the ground while watching this video. And if there is a truth that needs to be stated clearly, it is this: living in the mind is surviving. Living in the body is existing. Now, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what is the most present sensation in your body at this moment? Be honest. Naming is the first step to reconnecting. If this video touched you in any way, share it with someone who also feels trapped inside their own mind. And of course, subscribe to the channel, because here we don't speak to the surface of your consciousness. We speak to what you avoid looking at, and it doesn't stop here. The next video is an essential continuation of this journey. It is also important, and you need to watch it, because getting out of your head is just the beginning. Returning to life requires courage, and you don't have to do it alone.